Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome, and thank you guys for tuning in for 50 minutes to listen to an old spy. But I'm an old spy that's got some new ideas for you on ways to address your problems, HR problems, leadership problems in a whole different way than maybe what you've thought before. And my job here today is really to make your job easier. We're going to dig in and find out what makes people tick. What is it about human nature that is sometimes helps us in HR, and sometimes it seems to get in the way. We'll talk a little bit about why people resist change. And then I want to open it up and I'll give you just a smattering of solutions that I've been working with some neuroscientists on. How do you get other people to change? How do you get them to listen to maybe your ideas and so forth? So literally, we've got about 9 hours of material we're going to be pushing through in 50 minutes. So we're going to take a kind of a 3,000-foot approach to this. But if you have any follow-up questions, I'm going to give you my website and I'll give you my email. Just grab hold of me. So I was from the operations side at CIA and worked as what you would think of as a spy. And then years and years later, George Tenet, who was CIA director, asked me to start up a leadership academy at CIA, which I did, and I ran that several years. And then I ended up as chief HR for the agency, which gave me a really unique perspective. Now, I was not from the HR cone, so I had to rely on some really good people underneath to help me out. But what a wonderful position to be in, just to see how everything worked and where were the glitches and so forth. So this morning, though, we want to start with a little poll. It's going to be 2 questions. And the first poll is, have you ever had an insight in the last week, an insight? And what that is an aha moment. And it could be you had an insight at work. It could be at home, even doing puzzles. Insights can be very big or they can be very small. It doesn't matter. So just in the last week, go ahead and enter yes, no. Have you had one? And or not in the last 7 days. And I'll ask Kim, are we getting any results yet? There we go. Okay, great. The results are more than 80% of you say yes, and about a little less than 20% said no. And we're going to jump in more on this question later, and you'll see why this is a really, really important concept for HR. Okay, the next question, let's do the next one. Have you run into change resistance at work in the last week or at home, in any kind of a relationship? Had your boss resisted changing something, coworker, anything like that in the last week? Great. Okay. About 90%, right on the button, 90% of you have run into change resistance by other people in the last week, 10% no. Again, very, very helpful. Thank you guys for that. And we're going to talk about ways that you could overcome that change resistance later. So the way we're going to start, I'm going to show you a very simple model of the brain, two parts. It's just a copy of what a Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman did. It's basically think of the brain very simply in terms of logical brain, and then the rest of the brain, which is emotions and instincts and all that. But before that, I wanted to just say, I want you to have fun today, relax, sit back, think big thoughts, activate your chat if you would right now, so you can chime in and I can see some of what you guys are thinking. In fact, let's test chat. I'm going to ask you a question and go ahead and fill it in. The question is this: what is the basic human instinct? What do you think the basic human instinct is? A few of you go on and hit me up and let's see what you've got to say. Great. Holly, Renee, Paul, Jackie, everybody hit it. Now, some said fear, some said survival, we'll dig into that and we'll parse that a little bit. But yeah, let's assume self-preservation or survival is the key instinct we carry around. Now, you and I haven't thought about our survival probably in the last week. It's not conscious, but it's under there ticking in our unconscious. And that's very important. You're going to see as we dig into some HR type questions. So the next slide, we'll show you this two-brain model. Again, very simple. So Kim, there we go. You see we got the logical brain. That's basically the rational mind. And that's what we think of usually as the brain. But then we got all the rest of that stuff. Automatic brain. And sometimes when your grandparents talk to you, you heard them say, follow your heart. Well, that's basically your emotions, and those are in that, what we call the automatic brain. You've heard the expression, go with your gut. That's basically your instincts, which are down there. And that could be anything from drive to bonding and human relationships. Those really basic instincts we all have. You've heard people say, live your values. Well, those are in that automatic brain too. Now, what's interesting is the people that the Nobel Prize winner I mentioned, Daniel Kahneman, wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. The thinking fast part in our minds is that automatic brain. The thinking slow part is logical. So one easy way I find to think about this is if you're concentrating, that's in the logical brain. Otherwise, we're on cruise control, basically out of that automatic brain. And that automatic brain is kind of what we call human nature. So this is going to be our model going throughout. It's really simple, but we'll see we're going to get to some interesting places. For example, Marla raised the issue of fear. We'll talk about that and what a big impact that has in any organization in just a moment. So what my question to you is going to be, and get ready on your chat again, I'd love to see what you think, is what all do you think is in that automatic brain? Remember, it's everything but the logical, rational part of the brain. So what types of things are in there? Vision, dreams, that's one thing. Go ahead, let's have you hit up some items. Kelly says reactions, absolutely. That's a great one. Yeah, hunger and sleepiness are spring out of there. Kelly says creativity. Boy, have I got a surprise for you. And she's right. And I'll tell you about a little part of the brain right above your right ear that drives that. Reflex, any kind of reflex and response. Yep. Holly says spot judgment. Yes, kind of that quick, anything fast is coming out of that automatic brain. Gary, emotion, fight or flight. Yep. Kate says anything at the base of Maslow's hierarchy, and again, spot on. Self-actualization, Karina says, true, because there are a lot of needs that HR can meet that are buried down in that automatic brain of every employee. Okay, so that's good. You guys got it. Jealousy, that's a great one too. We'll go, Kim, let's go to the next slide and I'll just show you. Next slide after that. And this kind of gives you a quick answer, what you guys have already said. But go ahead and just take a look at that. And you get some very interesting things. You guys said reflex, obviously feelings, any kind of sensations and instinct. Now, one thing you may notice is that some of these things are repetitious. And the reason the diagram is done that way is because this stuff, all of this interesting things that are in your automatic brain are spread throughout the brain. In other words, it's not in one center. You can't go to a spot in your brain and say, where's habit reside? Or where are my instincts? Though there are some portions that hold the bulk of that. And so the point is that this stuff is very diffused. And in fact, in reality, my neuroscience friends always give me a cautionary view that, hey, even the logical part of the brain is enmeshed and linked to the automatic brain. So for example, in decision making on MRI scans, they've actually seen where a decision before you actually physically make it goes through the automatic brain almost as if it's got to be approved, and then it flips back up in a decision. So this stuff is more complex than we're saying, but we're just simplifying here so we can push ahead. So this gives us a basis for talking about human nature and how you deal with people in HR. But let me just step aside for a second and talk about change, and then we're going to come back to human nature again. Let's go to the next slide, which is the question is bullet 2, which is why do people resist change? And 90% of you have banged into this in some way or form in the last week. So the question to you is why is it? Why do you think people resist change? And I'm going to give you a massive hint because you guys have already answered the question. So what's a basic human instinct? And you told me survival, and psychologists certainly agree with you on that. So resisting change in an odd way helps you survive. Why is that? Because your mind thinks, I've done this way before. And so maybe if I change, it won't be safe. That's a huge driver. And that's embedded in all of us to one degree or another. Some of us resist change less than others, but still, as humans, we all do resist change to one degree or another. And it's so important because leaders' job on the leadership side is to invoke change. And that change is either a different direction, a different mission, getting people to actually get off the track they're on and take another track, or it's an improvement in performance. You want your workforce to perform better. Well, that is change, and that when you try that, you'll find that people are resistant to change. So one type of change resistance comes from habit. If you've done something 2-3 times or over a 3-week period or so, it's almost as if your brain trying to save energy, because the logical part of the brain uses up so much glucose. Trying to save energy, it's almost as if it writes a little software package and then gives it to the automatic brain and says, here, you run this now. Every time you get up in the morning, I want you to brush your teeth this way. Every time you drive to work, This is your established route. Let's take that. And then what happens if you try to change habit? Well, we know it's very difficult, and you can read blogs on changing habit all the time. It is extraordinarily difficult to diet. It's extraordinarily difficult to quit smoking. And the reason for that is, in part, when you have a habit, if you try to change it, that automatic brain sends out a little error message to say, hey, wait a minute, are you sure you want to do that? Because you were safe doing this activity, even if it was something harmful like smoking, but it thinks it's safe because it's been doing it. So it sends a little error message out that pings you and says, now, wait a minute, reconsider that. I can give you a quick example of that. If we were in a big auditorium and we had been having let's say a 4-day workshop, on day 3, what you would see is everybody comes back and sits in the same seats. The reason for that is we are creatures of habit, and it's comfortable for all the participants to come back and sit together in the same position. So what I would do right now would say, hey, in 3 minutes, I want everybody to gather up their things and we're going to shift our seats this morning. And what would I get? Well, I'd hear a groan. Oh no, I don't want to do that. Or do we have to do this? What that is that little error message coming to ping you. And then I end up not changing, not having to change the seats, obviously, but the message came through. It's a little ping, it's a little discomforting, and that holds us into habit. And that's one of the reasons from the mind standpoint that we do resist change. And Holly mentions on chat that this is the concept's really, if your brain is thinking, why fix it if it's not broken? So you're alive today as a result of all the habits you carried up till today. So it thinks, let's just stick with those. So change resistance can be a little difficult for all of us. And again, part of HR is implementing change. And it could be you've got a new HR process and you want to get people to adopt that. You've got some new idea, a new way of doing things, an improvement, whatever, and you find that somewhere, somehow, people are going to kind of push you back on that question. What's interesting is how I got involved in all this stuff. Years and years ago, I was the chief consultant to the spy master at CIA. This is the deputy director of operations, heads up all of what you think of sort of CIA does, which is the espionage part. And I got a call to come up to his office immediately, and I said, well, could you give me a hint on what the question is? And I was told, no, but it's urgent. So I went running up to his office and walked in, and he was sitting at his desk working, and he looked up and he asked me a question that changed my life. Simple question, but he looked up to me and he said, Mike, why is it when I pull the levers, nothing happens? And I knew by levers, he was talking a lot of our HR levers, basically the reward system, the metric system, all the performance management stuff. And it really shocked me because here's somebody in one of the most powerful positions in the world who has felt that the levers just weren't connected, that things weren't changing as he wanted. Well, it took me a long time. I'm a little slow, but it took me a long time to realize, well, the answer, not the solution, but the answer is basic human change resistance. It's embedded in all of us. And that's what you got to overcome. And sometimes our traditional levers don't do that. They won't do that. They won't get people to change. So after we finish with our what is human nature, what makes people tick portion, we're going to get into some of these solutions that we call mental prompts. Now, I am really excited by this next two slides. I made them just for you guys, never been shown before. It's kind of my chart on what makes people tick. And it's a sort of, again, a new way to think about leadership and HR, which both are obviously involved with people. So Kim, let's flip on to that next slide. And you can see our old friend, the automatic brain and the rational brain, logical brain are there. And you'll see that the automatic, I've drawn it a little larger than the rational. And the reason is because it is both in the geography of the brain as well as the amount of time we spend there. I've got one neuroscientist in New York that he estimates we spend about 85% of our day in automatic brain mode, maybe 15% in that rational or logical side. And remember, the rational side is filling out a form because you have to concentrate. It's things like parallel parking. If you got a kind of a tight spot, you realize you got to turn the radio down and you're going to be paying attention to what you're doing. So that's a logical brain function. On the other hand, if you're driving to work the same route every day, that's automatic brain function. And I'm sure all of you have had this experience. You're driving along and you look up and you see, oh my goodness, there's that convenience store. How did I get here? Well, your automatic brain was driving you along. Have no fear. It was just carrying you where you want to go. And the reason, again, it's not using up much energy to do that. And that's why the automatic brain kicks in like that. So the rational brain monitors the behavior of that automatic brain. So that means that the instincts you guys talked about earlier that are over on the auto side, the values and behaviors, all that good stuff is being watched by the rational brain. And the trouble is, as neuroscientists kind of say, they're joking in a way, but the rational brain has a tendency to take naps during the day. And that's when we see all kinds of things happening in the workplace, say emotions spring up, or people come to loggerheads very quickly over an issue. What's happening is their rational mind is not monitoring and closing down that automatic brain. And again, the auto brain has that instinct, habit, emotion, all that in there. So under the auto brain, you see survival, which is basically screaming out, hey, don't change anything. Everything's working as it is. And under that, we're going to go to Psychology 101, and you'll see your fear and reward down there. And so we're getting back to what Marla said. She brought up fear under the survival. Well, it's a big portion. The fear is there and the reward is there. So if you think about it very simply, on the reward side, unconsciously, we're all saying, what's in it for me? And as your employees are. And on the fear side, there's, again, it's unconscious, but it's what could hurt me. So we're a little worried. And by the way, there's fear in every organization I've ever been into. There's some low-level fear. Some organizations have more than others. And that's when those organizations can get into a bit of trouble. So these are two very powerful drivers, the fear and reward. Which, hit me up on chat, which of these two do you think are more powerful? Which are more powerful? See what you guys come up with. Yep, Marla's back with her fear. Kelly, Kimberly, Roseanne, absolutely. Fear is more powerful. And let me give you a quick story on that. I'm out in my yard. We planted some fruit trees a number of years ago. And let's say I'm standing in the tall grass and I'm reaching up and getting an apple. And now I hear a rustling at my feet. What do I think? A snake. Well, of course, it's not a snake. It was a chipmunk. But what happened to me when I thought that for a split second? Was I more interested in jumping away from the snake or getting that apple? So the apple was the reward, and the fear was what's there in the grass. Paul wants to know, why did it have to be snakes? Well, it doesn't have to be, but you'll find often when the brain is confronted, Paul, with something that is new, we have something called the negativity bias. In other words, it's better to be negative about that perceived change. Okay, Paul, thank you. It's a Indiana Jones reference. It's better to be safe than sorry. So we tend to be more negative when there's a change. And that's why, for example, your boss's boss comes down and says there's a reorganization. Could be good, I don't know. But every one of us, every employee, brain will lock up because of that negativity bias on what could hurt me, back down here on the fear portion of our little chart. Now, under that fear, there's really two kinds. I quantify this two kinds of fear. One of them are social fears, and this is, I'm worried about my relationships with other people. I'm certainly concerned about my relationship with my boss. Those are kind of social concerns. And then you've got general concerns, which would be everything from sort of physical survival, which we rarely pops up, but other things such as my pay and so forth, or let's say my status is a better one, my status in the organization. And then on the reward side, as some of you know, we split rewards into two kinds. You got extrinsic and intrinsic rewards, right? And extrinsic are the sort of the outside motivators, like payroll and bonuses. And then the intrinsic rewards are really what's inside of us. And we're going to delve into that in a minute when we get to the next slide. And I want to warn you, the next slide is going to be very busy because it's this part with some things at the bottom. First are, what kind of concerns do employees have under these categories? What are their underlying questions? And then third level is kind of what's important in order to address those issues. So Kim, let's go to that next busy slide. And the best way to look at this thing for all of us, a little overwhelming to see, I know, but we'll start at the top and we'll go down each of the four columns. So we're going to start on the left side. So again, auto brain wants you to survive. Fear and reward are crucial, but on the fear side, you've got that social fear, which involve relationships, rejection, unfairness, exclusion, all of those things. Some fascinating work being done at UCLA at the Amundsen Brain Center on this stuff. I got to fly out there and watch the MRI work being done, and what they found, that if you feel a sense of rejection by somebody, or you're publicly humiliated by a boss in a meeting, or you sense unfairness, any of this produces what they call social pain. It's an emotional pain in the brain. And what's really remarkable is that pain follows the same path as physical pains if you burned your hand. The interesting thing about it is that it is held in memory more intensely than physical pain. So in high school, you remember you sprained your ankle playing soccer. You can remember vaguely that hurt. But if you think about Maria, who betrayed you, still you get that little kick there of that memory. So these emotional memories are held in memory longer and more intensely. And that's really important in HR because we want to make sure we don't hit those tripwires, right? What are the questions that they ask in that? Do my colleagues respect me? Is my boss happy with me? Those types of things are very important on the social side. So what's important in your culture is there psychological safety? And do you have a trusting organization? All that can basically assist you with those issues. Now, on the other side, the fear side, loss of control, see under general, loss of control, uncertainty, ambiguity. The brain absolutely detests uncertainty because survival could be threatened. So we will all try to gain certainty, and we all have questions we need asking, which are down below. Is my job secure? Are they going to reorganize? Those types of things to try to fill in that certainty gap. This is really a big concept for you guys, that if people don't feel certain, they're going to be a little discombobulated. And then the key principle under that is clarity. How do you really get clarity out of this whole concept? And let me give you a little story here. I call this the Savannah River paradox. The Savannah River site is one of the 16 national U.S. labs spread around the country. And they do a lot of environmental work, so forth. And they have grand workforce doing some exciting stuff. And I went down there to work with the executives and then also with their frontline managers. And the executives were a little concerned about what are the issues boiling up underneath. So I did what I call a quick win with some employees. Quick win is, I copied it from Jack Welch when I worked for him for 9 years. He calls it workout. But all it is you get a group of employees together without the boss being present, and they brainstorm for about 30 or 40 minutes on what troubles them, little things, what troubles them, and then what types of solutions can they come up with. And it's got to be something that either affects mission or it affects quality of life. And what happens is a lot of issues are brought out that would not otherwise come out. It's a safe environment for people to talk in. This is actually one of those mental prompts I'm talking about, because it's a safe environment. People are thinking, having insights, coming up with recommendations. They're all bought in because everybody's involved. So it's a real powerful little tool to use. So I came back in with the boss, and we got the brief out. And number one issue was communications. We don't get enough communications. I was not shocked by that. And the reason is because that's in every organization, feels they could communicate better. People feel to one degree or another that they're not getting enough communications. In some of the harshest environments, toxic cultures, they get zero information. So that didn't surprise me. But then here's what the next thing they came up with was, we have too many meetings. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, wait a minute. You don't have enough communications, right? And you got too many meetings. How can that be? But because aren't the meetings communicating? So I call that the Savannah River paradox. How do you have too many meetings and yet you've got some kind of itch by employees that's not being scratched? Well, the answer is that little column there, the underlying questions under the fear column. Do my colleagues respect me? Is my boss happy with me? Is my job secure? Those things are what people want communications on, not when is the next plant visit, or what is the next trip that the boss is taking, or what are the results of our campaign that we've got running on X, Y, or Z, collecting money for a good cause and so forth. All those are important. That information is important. That's logical stuff, but that doesn't address the itch. So meetings won't get you to the promised land. Now, let's flip over to the reward side just quickly. Remember, we talked about it, extrinsic, and that's the stuff HR does. Improving work conditions, new computers for every desktop, promotions, pay systems, all of that good stuff. And the questions that people have are maybe cafeteria hours. or can I get a performance bonus this 6-month period? But on the intrinsic side, you've got things like inclusion. Am I a part of something bigger than me? Do I have a real cause here? How do I link up with the big picture? Am I making a difference here? Can I achieve something every day? Interesting studies on motivation show if you can just roll the ball forward a little bit every day and you can make these new achievements, goals, so forth, that's highly motivating for humans. But as you can see, that's stuff that's all locked inside of our automatic brain, isn't it? And the questions again are, how far can I experiment? What are the guardrails in terms of how creative I can be? I need to know that answer to be safe. Am I really making a difference for the organization? So all those are HR type questions, but they have to be addressed. And so part of that is going to be the frontline manager using some of these techniques we're going to talk about next on the mental prompts to help address those things. So if you want more on this kind of stuff, please go to my website too. Mike Mears is my name, and it's mikemears.com. That easy, and you can download all kinds of stuff. And I've got a newsletter every other week that you could sign up for. So let's talk about the 3 prompts now. What's the answer to this? And we're going to talk about, next slide shows you insight prompts, something I call broad scale prompts, and something that are called behavioral prompts, which we're not going to get into today because of time. But Kim, let's go to the next one. Next slide. Go ahead, one more. There you go. Insight prompts I want to talk about first. It's a fascinating topic. Remember, over 80% of you have had an insight in the last week, big or small. What is it? And let's go to the next slide. Basically that aha moment. And it's an abrupt appearance of a solution in your mind. Now, this is going to start to sound a little eerie, but this is some current work in neuroscience. What happens? For years, psychologists thought that an aha was simply rapid analytical thinking. Analytical thinking, of course, is occurring in your logical part of your brain. So they assumed that it's the same part of the brain, but it is just very fast analytical thinking. Well, a fellow named John Cunos, who I've worked with, and Mark Beeman, made a discovery that I think will get them a Nobel Prize. But what they did is they hooked up a lot of different types of scanning equipment, brain scanning equipment, to individuals, and they tested them as they provoked insight in those people. And what they discovered is it is a totally different function than analytical thought. It's a small region of the brain, oddly enough, above the right ear. What happens is the frequency changes in the brain. They don't know why. There's a flash of energy, literally, that you can see on an MRI scan, just like the light bulb in a cartoon that goes off. New neuron connections are made instantaneously. Again, they don't know how this happens. But here's the HR thing. What if you had a magic chemical you could give to somebody to remove that uncertainty? Remember that automatic brain is sitting there and it's got a braking mechanism because it doesn't want change. What if you could get that uncertainty so that the brakes went off of that brain? And that's what happens. There's a mix of chemicals that occur when you have an aha moment that gives you complete certainty. And it could be filling out a crossword puzzle, a Sudoku, something like that. That's a tiny one. You get that little ping and, oh, that's it. And you put it down. You're absolutely sure and you act. Well, the same thing can happen on a very large level. Wow, maybe this is the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. It could be a huge aha, it could be something very small. So think of these things as the brake release for the brain. And I'm going to give you a couple stories to show, okay, well, how could you use this? How do you use this in the workplace? I'll tell you a story about two directors. So let's go, we'll skip ahead 2 slides, Kim. And my definition is right there at the top. It's an insight nudge, I call it, is a polite nudge to trigger others to reflect, because you have to reflect, gain insight, have an insight or an aha moment, and then change behavior. So I'll give you an example of one is down below. You say, you would tell, if you're the boss, you tell somebody, give me 3 ideas on this in 2 weeks, come back to me. Well, that is it's done without duress. It's a polite request. You're giving them adequate time to do it, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Then there's discipline, because there's a deadline for them to come back. Now, let me tell you 2 quick stories about the CIA to show you how powerful this stuff is. I was walking down the hall with the CIA director one time, and I'm not going to name who that was, but he turned to me as we're walking down the 7th floor hall, and he said, "Mike, why is it they're not being more creative?" Now, I knew he was talking about the employees, because he was very, very big into creativity and innovation. He was passionate about it. And then he paused and he looked at me and he said, "I told them in my first talk that I wanted more innovation." So how do you answer that one? I was stopped. I was dumbfounded by the question. So obviously his jawboning, his lecturing to the workforce didn't work. And the reason was it was aimed at that logical brain. Now here's another story, second story. Some of you may remember the hunt for bin Laden, which lasted, 9 years. And the reason it was so hard to find him was he wasn't communicating. He wasn't using cell phones. He didn't have a headquarters anywhere. He was in a hideout, and not even using basically internet. So one day, Leon Panetta was the CIA director, and he would have a 5 o'clock meeting every day and talk about every Wednesday, and he would talk about bin Laden. It was the bin Laden meeting. What are we doing? What new ideas are there, and so forth. So Leon Panetta turned to one officer and he said, "Well, tell me now, what do you think? What new ideas have you got?" And the officer shrugged, and he said, "Sir, I'm sorry, we are completely out of ideas." Well, Panetta flared up and quickly, good for him, he pulled back and he said, "I'm sorry, I'm not mad at you, but I'm just discomforted by this situation here." And he said, "This is what we're going to do. We're going to cancel today's bin Laden meeting, and I want you guys to go away and next week come back and give me 10 new ideas on how we find bin Laden." So the meeting adjourned, everybody went away, and what happened? Well, a week later, meeting adjourned, they had 37 new ideas to capture bin Laden. And the reason is he used what is called that insight prompt. He gave people a little homework, made them reflect and think, and by golly, they did, and they came up with some great ideas on insight. There are other insight prompts too, but I want to go to kind of another category of these things real quickly, called broad scale prompts. So Kim, let's go to that one. These are broader, wider scale ways to, in some cases, get that insight magic going. And you can see one of them is question asking. If any of you are in coaching, if you are in training, as Socrates taught us, that question asking is extraordinarily powerful. There's a magical group of people, facilitators, who can help by using questions, guide the thinking of groups to come up with some great insights and pull people together. So question asking, why is that powerful? Well, because it has a huge impact on the brain. It stops all other activity of the brain. For example, if you had somebody who's highly emotional and came to your office ranting and raving, you could stop them with just a question, five-word question. You could say, well, why is that? Why do you say that? What happens is now they have to stop those emotions for a second, and the brain locks onto that question. It has to answer that question, and will. And then the answer may not be a good one, but then you just say again, well, why do you say that? And it's interesting, you can talk people off a ledge who are highly agitated. Now, what I've done here, we don't have time to go into this. We could talk for a long time on question asking, but I've got some reference material for you. Kim, go to the next slide. Don't read this slide. I'm just leaving it for you so you can have it. It just shows you the power of questions. You can use this to frame something. You could use it to drive solutions. So I just wanted you to tuck that away, because these things are so powerful in terms of prompting change, prompting thinking, and so forth. On the next issue I want to talk about is something called purposeful discussions. And I've got inclusion there because we all want to be a part of something. That's a key driver. We want a piece of the pie. Can we make some decisions here ourselves? How can we play in the big scheme of things? So inclusion is really, really important. But it's important to do that with what I call purposeful discussions. They're relaxed. This is not high pressure stuff. It's not a meeting in your office. They are generally, they're always two-way, and there's certainly more listening going on than telling. And one of the ways, again, this is for reference for you only, but Microsoft and a few other companies have started something called check-ins, which are very, very powerful meetings, short meetings between a frontline manager and employee. If supervisors could do this, it makes HR's job easier, because all it is supervisor once a week. I like to see it once a week, and it's only a 5 to 7 minute meeting. Could be a stand-up meeting, could be a meeting in their cubicle, but probably not in the office of the supervisor or frontline manager. It's a little too formal. What you do is you just ask them, chat, a little icebreaker, how's it going, or what's the latest on your child's soccer, whatever. And then you just drill into one thing. It could be, what's the status of what you're working on? It could be, what roadblocks have you had, and what can I help you with? It could be their recent accomplishments that they're proud of. Just something like that, because what it gives you seamless feedback. And what a check-in will do is starting to scratch the itch of all those questions we asked before. Remember, under fear, we had, boss, how am I doing? How do I fit in here? Well, you're not directly answering those questions in a check-in, but you are filling that itch and answering some of it anyway. So the important thing is, I'm going to give you this as a reference again. Next slide, Kim. I want you guys to print that off and see how you could use it with others. And remember, it's relaxed. It is very short and very positive. The last thing I want to talk to you about real quickly before I give you a final story is something I call show, don't tell. And the reason is that about huge portion of your brain is devoted to vision, as you know, or visioning. And that's why stories are so powerful, because that's the way the brain works. That that portion of the brain for vision and visioning is about as big geographically as Asia is on the world map. It's about 40% of our brain. So think of the visual as sort of a gateway to get into somebody's head. To me, it's like using the visual cortex is like the reception room for somebody's brain. If you want to go see them, how are you going to do it? Well, use vision, use show, don't tell. So let's skip a slide. We'll go to the next one and then one more. And this is kind of some of the stuff. One back. Graphically displayed data is extremely powerful. I showed General Hayden why we should have more training, more leadership training in CIA by just one simple piece of paper. It was a graph of how much leadership and management training did CIA officers have, general grade officers, how much in SES officers in government have, and then how much did general grade officers in the military have. And just showing that chart, he immediately saw it and said, we've got to have more training. So images and demos do that, cartoons. Symbolic actions are a real good one that leaders can use. In fact, I'm going to close today and give you a story on my best boss. And since we're not covering a lot of the behavioral prompts because we don't have time in 1 hour, you can see some of the behaviors he used and why I think he was my best boss. But also there's storytelling, case studies, simulations, all that stuff activates that automatic part of the brain. And that's why those things are all very, very powerful. So just don't overlook those. I wanted to leave you too with a website that I think is stunning. If you haven't jumped into this, every facilitator in the world should be on this site, and coaches. And if you in HR, almost any function, you could use this. It's called liberatingstructures.com. Do you see that down there at the bottom of the slide? It's got about 30 tools you can use. Some of them are sort of like that mental prompt I mentioned. Remember the quick win? Some of them are a little bit like that, but most of them are very powerful, where you can take a large group and you come up with some answers and agreement. More importantly, I use this at NNSA, National Nuclear Security Administration, with a group of executives. And in 50 minutes, we had about 50 people in the room, and they all agreed on a new strategy. They were all bought in. So it's called 1, 2, 4 all. But these are powerful, powerful tools to be able to help you unlock that automatic brain. And then I've got tips at my website too. So MikeMears.com. So, okay, let's go ahead to the next slide. I want you guys to remember, before I tell you my story about my best boss, that we're not as rational as we think we are. Keep that in mind. Survival is ticking underneath all of our minds, and that's why we are change resistant. But the way to unlock that change resistant is anything you can do that prompts insight and produces those chemicals of certainty. And you can apply every bit of this at work, and it is scalable upward, so you can even change culture. In my view, reorganizations almost never work because they're banging up against the logical brain, and they're not addressing those deeper issues that we talked about, the deeper HR questions people have. So that sums it up. I wanted to throw it open if anybody's got a question or two before I give you your final bedtime story, I guess. Kim, let's go to the next slide. We've got a little survey I'd love for you to take after we're done here. And we've got, there's my website. Go ahead if you want workshops or that newsletter, any tips, go to that. There's my email. So drop me a note. Let me know if you apply any of this or how you're doing. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn. Okay, let me go ahead and I'm going to tell you a story about my best boss. And this is kind of a crossover again of um, leadership and HR, basically. His name was Malcolm Baldridge. Remarkable guy. He had, you may have heard of that name. And the reason is the Baldrige Award in the private sector. That's the ultimate reward that a company can get. He was a leader, business leader, in way before the Reagan administration. Very successful. His employees absolutely loved him. I think he's just an innate natural leader. And then President Reagan tapped him to join the Commerce Department, head that up. So he became Secretary of Commerce. Back in a turbulent era, we were doing a lot of work with the Soviet trade, and there were all kinds of hot issues, even China back then. But he was an interesting guy, where he would come into the cafeteria, and you can imagine this, where a minister level, a secretary, comes into the cafeteria, and the employees scatter like little minnows in front of a shark to try and get out of his way. Well, what he would do is he would grab one and say, no, come on, let's have lunch together. And then he'd go grab another one. Come on, sit down, we'll just have lunch. So he would get about 8 employees, and they would sit down and have lunch. He would just chat them up. He made it a point not to direct anybody to do something, because that would certainly violate the intent of the management chain. But he would always ask one question I found interesting, which was, hey, if you were me, what one thing would you change at the Commerce Department? Very clever question, because it was a low-key way to gather feedback about anything and everything. Now, how many people do you think that had lunch that day with the Secretary of Commerce told other people that they had had lunch with the Secretary of Commerce? You see, it's almost like a nuclear reaction. And that's one of those great symbolic acts that, again, hits the visual cortex that can carry for an executive. Deeply loved. So anyway, I had a dispute with another fellow named Frank. And Frank came to me one day and said, Mike, I'm going to go talk to Mac Baldridge about this, because I don't think you should push this, but I wanted you to know. Well, I respected Frank for doing that, because at least he told me to my face. So as expected, I get a call a day later, 2 days later, actually, to come up to Mac Baldridge's office. It was a Friday. It was an afternoon. So I go up there, and I had forgotten that he, as a hobby, was a rodeo rider. In fact, he was in the top 1 or 2 ranked in the world as a rodeo rider. And so on Fridays, he would cut out of work early, 4 o'clock, and go practice his riding. So there I walk into his office, and there's the Secretary of Commerce walking around in jeans and a big bandana sitting out of his back of his pocket, walking around. He said, Mike, come on in and let's talk about this. So we sat down, and I carefully laid out the issue. He listened to me, and he said, good, we're good to go. So don't worry about Frank, I'll take care of that. He gave me top cover. Well, then he said to me, I started to get up, and he said, no, let's talk. Well, I had the best 1-hour talk I've ever had with anybody after that. One-on-one, Secretary of Commerce. He gave me time, which is invaluable gift to him. He gave that to me. So I'm locked in. I trust him with my, virtually with my life. A year later, I was in Moscow, Soviet Union. I got a message, report the embassy, and this is a tragic part of the story. He said, the note said, we regret to inform you Mac Baldridge was killed today in a rodeo accident. And it was a freak accident. Horse rolled over, and the pommel of the saddle hit his belt buckle, and he died. It was the day that the Commerce Department cried. Never seen an impact like that on an organization. And that would be the end of the story, except 20 years later, my wife worked for a trade organization, and she knows how I feel about Baldrige. She came rushing home to me and said, Mike, Mac Baldrige. And I said, well, what? She said, we had a group from the Commerce Department today of 10 people. And she said, it's 20 years later, and they're still talking about Mac Baldrige. And that's a legacy. That's a legacy, and that's something I wish for each and every one of you in your HR careers. And I hope you can draw some of the things we've talked about today and use these. Get linked up with me, and let's stay in touch. Any way I can help you, I will. So thank each and every one of you, and Kim, thanks to you guys and HR.com for setting all this up.
Mike, thank you so much for your presentation and story at the end. This has been wonderful, and people are asking about your slides. And so I will just close out our session with letting you know that this concludes this webcast. I'd like to thank Mike as well as all of you for joining us. If you joined late and would like to view this webcast again, the recording and slides will be available at hr.com in our archive virtual events. Your HRCI credit will show up in your hr.com account within 2 business days. We will also send out an email with the credit information. Please take a few moments to fill out the webcast survey that will pop up open on your screen. Your feedback is very important to us. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of the event.